Hey guys, it's Leah. Welcome back, or welcome if you are new, and welcome to my end of year book tag. I also did this video last year for Bookmas and I absolutely loved reflecting back on the year, reflecting on my favourite books of the year, my disappointments, my surprises, seeing what my favourite quotes were, who my favourite characters were. I just think that this tag is such a brilliant way to kind of reflect. So I have just taken all of my questions that I used last year and I am so excited to get into them. I have a whole stack of books. To be fair, I have many stacks of books behind me. A new reorganisation is imminent, but I do have a whole stack of books to talk about today, which I am so excited about. So we're just gonna get straight on into it. Feel free to go grab yourself your favourite drink or a cozy cup of tea. So the first question is, what was your most disappointing read of the year? And I'm not gonna lie, this year I feel like I've read such incredible reads. One of my main goals for last year was to expand my genres, and I definitely did that. I think especially in terms of fantasy and romantasy, I absolutely did. There have been some disappointments also, but I will say the number one disappointment, mainly because it was my most anticipated book of the entire year. I did film a reading vlog earlier in the year of me reading the book because I did get a proof, and it's just from one of my favourite authors, so I was expecting like 5 stars. The synopsis sounded absolutely perfect to me. It sounded a book that was kind of written for me, and unfortunately I just didn't love it that much. That was Private Rights by Julia Armfield. I feel like I haven't spoken about this book for so long, and that will be the reason why. Julia Armfield is the author of Our Wives Under the Sea, which is one of my favourite books. I absolutely love that book. That is like a 6-star read for me, so going into this I fully was anticipating the same. This is literary fiction, but it does also lean quite post-apocalyptic, dystopian-esque, as we are set in the world where it just does not stop raining. I really adore that concept. I love anything that is post-apocalyptic or dystopian mixed with that literariness, so I was fully anticipating to love this. We are also following 3 sisters who have recently lost and are grieving their dad, which again is something that I thought I would love, because girl, I can relate. I thought I was gonna love this. Do not get me wrong, Julia Armfield's writing was absolutely astonishing. Honestly, the ending of this book is so vivid for me and I can still remember it now. I really wish that the intrigue and the suspense and the writing at the end of the book and like the last 10% was in the entirety of it, because if it was, that was kind of what I was expecting. It would have been 5 stars. I can't even quite remember what I ended up rating this. I want to say between 3 and 3.5. I'll put it on the screen, but it was a disappointment, and that's not to say it's a bad book. I personally, unfortunately, was just expecting a lot more from it, so it was a disappointment. I would still recommend it if you are into that sort of vibe, but yeah, wasn't a 5-star like I was hoping. Okay, next is a good one, and it is the Underdog of the year. As I said already, I feel like I've had quite a couple of underdogs because I've really gone into new genres that I've absolutely fallen in love with. But I will say that this one is an underdog because I've been wanting to read from this author for years, and I finally decided to get into her books this year, and this was actually the first book that I ever read on my Kindle. I can so vividly remember reading this book, the feelings that I had when reading it, the feelings that I had after it. It's still one of the only 5 stars I've had all year, and that is Death Valley by Melissa Broder. I will say, because I had never read a Melissa Broder, I did still have anticipation, and I kind of knew I would love her writing. She is a literary fiction writer, but she writes literary fiction in a way that is so strange and so ambiguous and weird, and is definitely one of those books for like the weird girls who like literary fiction. And oh my god, I absolutely adored this. I literally think about this book all of the time. I would absolutely recommend going into this knowing as little as possible, but if you would like to know a little bit about it, we are essentially following our protagonist who escapes to the Californian desert. Her husband has a sickness that is worsening, her dad is in the ICU, so she is facing a lot of preempted grief, premature grief, and also acceptance. I've said it so many times, but if something is literary or literary horror, for example, not that this is, but it's also mixed with grief, I love that. Grief for a metaphor of anything like that, I'm gonna eat it up. And this was exactly that. When I was going into it, all I literally knew was what it says on the back from the Cosmopolitan. Think the Chronicles of Narnia, but instead of a wardrobe, it's a cactus. This book was so strange. I don't know if anyone's gonna remember, but I posted a picture on my B-reel and then I spoke about it on like my TikTok and everywhere. Because I was utterly mortified, I took a picture of me reading this on my Kindle, on my B-reel. There was one specific scene. If you've read this book, you know, with the cactus. I was mortified. The fact that people saw me reading this in public, but it was so good. Highly recommend. As I said, one of my 5 stars of the year. I love Melissa Broder. Flipping the underdog slightly, we then have a book that was overhyped. I used to own this book. I don't anymore because it is one that I actually DNF'd, and that is Butter by Izaki Yuzuki, I think is the author. I No, I did not like this book. This book has been absolutely everywhere this year, and I'm well aware that my opinion is likely the unpopular opinion because I know so many people love this. It also won the Waterstones Prize this year, and I'm not gonna lie, babe, am I a bookseller anymore? No, I'm kind of happy that I don't have to promote this book because I did not like it. When I say I DNF'd it too, I got about 50% of the way through, so I read half of this book, and this book isn't necessarily short. I was going into this really expecting to love it. I remember getting a proof copy of this book in December 2023, and I was so excited because it sounded so up my alley. I knew it was about food, I know it was unhinged, a little bit like crime thrillery. I just heard there was a murderous woman, so I was like, okay, I'm absolutely gonna love this, and I just really didn't. Honestly, I can't really give too much reason as to why I didn't because I've completely removed any memory of this book in my brain, but I do remember solely reading this book, and I am so aware that it is a book about a chef and she cooks and she likes food, but me, she rams it home. This woman likes food. Maybe I read it at the wrong time, or maybe this is just something that I don't like in literature, but the dense description of food was just so overdone to the point that the pace was so slow for me. To the point where I was literally like, babe, I know you're a chef, I know you love to cook, and I absolutely love that for you, but I don't want to sit and read a 30-page monologue about butter or margarine. Like, it was just not for me. I am well aware that so many people love that in literature, and I kind of wish that I did, or maybe I do, maybe this was the wrong book or perhaps the wrong time, but I just had to DNF it because if not, it definitely would have put me into a slump. So due to that, I would have to say that that is the book that I feel is the most overhyped this year, but in the same breath, I'm well aware that that is an unpopular opinion. So if you did like butter, please let me know, or also if you didn't, please also let me know so I don't feel so alone in my opinion. Okay, now we are on to the best adaptation of the year, and I really was not sure. Initially reading this, I was like, I don't know what adaptations I've even watched, because last year my answer was undoubtedly Daisy Jones and the Six. I still think about that, and actually such a weird comment because on my TikTok all morning, like today solely, I have had so many Daisy Jones and the Six edits, and I literally cannot stop thinking about this adaptation. I really do want to rewatch it, but I couldn't really think of anything or like a TV show that was an adaptation that really gripped me the way Daisy Jones and the Six did. But a couple of months ago I did go to the premiere of Small Things Like These by Claire Keegan, obviously a movie starring Cillian Murphy. I am not a huge Claire Keegan lover. Like, I have read a couple of her books, and every one that I've read, I've never been really obsessed with them. I can 100% appreciate her craft and how talented of a writer she is, but just for me, they don't really do it. I always fall back to if her books were longer, because they are always such tiny novellas, I would love them. Like, if there was more in-depth analysis or like character development, I would fall in love. But I know that she's not that sort of writer, and her novellas absolutely have like a gut punch to the stomach every time you read them, but I've never been 100% obsessed. But I did go to the premiere for Small Things Like These, and personally for me, the movie was so much better than the book, and I was not expecting that. I know there are some die-hard Claire Keegan fans out there, so if you do disagree with this, please don't hate me for my take. I just really love the film so much. This book, but especially this movie, was so impactful. I nearly bawled my eyes out at the end, at the credits, because it is based on true history and it is a true story. I do recommend checking out what it is before you go and watch it or you read it, because it's definitely quite heavy, but it was so beautiful. Even the movie, Cillian Murphy is Cillian Murphy, right? Like, we know he is such a phenomenal actor. In this movie, I was completely floored. Cillian Murphy was actually there. I will say I did have an absolute dying moment. He was probably stood as far away to me as this camera is now, and I died. But the film in general was so beautiful. Would highly recommend watching it. That definitely was the best book to movie or book to screen adaptation that I have seen all year. Okay, we're now on to my biggest surprises of the year, and for this, again, I have two. First and foremost is a really recent read for me, and that is Intermezzo by Sally Rooney. Again, kind of like Claire Keegan, Sally Rooney has always been an author who I have read from because I am so aware that she is such a big part of the literary space, and I've always been intrigued. I've always hoped that I would read one of her books and fall in love with it, and I never experienced that. I read Normal People and Conversations with Friends, and I loved them and I appreciated them for what they were. Normal People specifically, I definitely preferred the adaptation, but going into Intermezzo, I was a little bit, not hesitant, but I was intrigued to see how I would feel because I heard people say this was her best, and oh my god, I 100% stand by that. This is definitely my favourite Sally Rooney yet. This book has kind of confirmed to me that I am going to absolutely continue reading her, and honestly, if it just carries on the way that this is going, I'm going to love all of them. I'm sure you already know, but Intermezzo follows two brothers who are grieving their dad, and it is so raw and so impactful. Cannot criticize Sally Rooney's writing or her craft at all. She is incredible. There is a reason that she's such a big name now. The way that she writes characters endlessly floors me. That is always my number one thing in any Sally Rooney novel, but in the way that she wrote these, like these, I cried. All of her books, to the core of them, is what it is like to be human. They are so raw. They are unapologetically imperfect in terms of the characters. She is not scared of making her characters and her protagonists so unlikable because it's so real and it is so realistic and it's so raw. And I love that every single time, but especially in this one. I was so pleasantly surprised by how much I love this. I did end up rating it 4 stars. It's probably more like 4.25, 4.5. It wasn't quite a 5 yet. I haven't had that with Sally Rooney just yet, but I loved it so much more than her other 2 books that I have read. So this was definitely a big surprise and I'm so happy about it. And then my other biggest surprise is actually a non-fiction book, which is why it is such a big surprise, because it's definitely most likely in my top 10 of the year. I am gonna have an entire video, as I do every single year. I always upload it on New Year's Day, going through my top 10 books of the year prior, and this might be in it. Spoiler alert, but it is Philosophy of the Home by Emmanuel Coquillard. I picked this up, oh my god, I read it throughout the entirety of the summer, I want to say, and I initially bought it and I picked it up because it was novel research. I am writing a novel and I'm writing a novel that very much features one home and one building and like some sort of sentient home. So when I first saw this, I was like, okay, this is great novel research. It was, absolutely, it really aided my process for writing, but equally just as a non-fiction text, cannot recommend it enough. Obviously, it discusses the philosophy of the home and domestic space and happiness, but it goes into these little subcategories of moving, love, bathrooms, household articles, wardrobes, twins, white powder, social media, pets, forests and gardens, kitchens, and the new home or the philosopher's stone. And it was beautiful. This is one of the best non-fiction books that I have ever read, and I very rarely read non-fiction. Like, I've read a lot of non-fiction that's memoir, but in terms of actual like information, I've never really picked that many up. But this is definitely, like, I think about this book all of the time. All of these dog ears are quotes that I absolutely loved and needed to remember. I'm so obsessed with this book. I haven't felt this way about a non-fiction book, I think, since reading The Year of Magical Thinking by Joan Didion in 2022, which is a book I still, again, think about every single day. But this is the first non-fiction book that isn't a biography or a memoir that I'm floored by, and genuinely, like, even if you don't read non-fiction, I cannot recommend reading this enough. I truly think that everybody will get something great from it. I personally am just so fascinated by homes, what constitutes and makes a home, how we make homes and we find homes in people and things and different buildings, especially in ones that we don't necessarily reside in. I just thought it was astonishing and so unique. It was just absolutely phenomenal. Cannot recommend that one enough. That was 5 stars, so a big surprise. In a similar vein, we go on to some new favourites. Like I said, I am going to have a whole video about my top 10 favourites of the year, but going into like favourite series, I suppose. Again, there's 2. I can never just answer with one. The first one is not necessarily cheating, because I had read the first 2 books in this series last year, but I finished this series with 3 books, I believe, this year, so I'm counting it as this year's favourite, and that is of course the Magnolia Park series. Showing you these 2 because these 2 are definitely my favourite in the series. I think my number 1 favourite of the entire series is Daisy Hates the Great Undoing, but simultaneously Magnolia Park's Into the Dark. I love this series so much. When I first picked the series up last year, I was really not expecting to love it the way that I did, because 1, it's not really my normal sort of read, and 2, I hate the miscommunication trope with every single thing in me, and I was told going into it that it was very heavily miscommunication. All of that aside, this is a 5-star series for me. I love the characters, I love the setting. I literally go, every time I go into London, I'm expecting to bump into these people like they're real. I just think that Jessa Hastings has created such an incredible series, and I am going to read every single thing that is released in this series, spin-offs. I cannot wait. I absolutely adore it. 5-star series. A new favourite. Another 5-star series for me, which is a series of duologies. I've spoken about this so many times, so you probably know who it is. It's of course Carissa Broadbent, the Crowns of Nixia series universe. Obviously we have The Serpent and the Wings of Night by Carissa Broadbent. I'm showing this because it's the first and also one of my favourites. But my favourite book that I've read from Carissa Broadbent yet is definitely 6 Scorched Roses, which is a novella in this universe, in this series. I have really fallen in love with Carissa Broadbent. She is undoubtedly my number 1 favourite fantasy author now, and I'm so excited to read more from her. I feel like I'm going to read every single series she releases, every single book she ever releases. I'm so excited to carry on with this universe and this series. I just had to mention them because they are definitely new favourites of the year, and she's an auto-buy author for me now, so I love them. Oh, actually, then we're now on to the longest book that I read this year, and it is undoubtedly Magnolia Park's Into the Dark. This is about 710 pages. Like, this is a big book, and I remember just flying through it. I sobbed the entire way through though. I can't really explain to you what this is about. I'm sure you you already know, but it is the last book, the last Magnolia book that we are getting in this series, the last Magnolia and BJ book. I will cry if I think about it anymore. I did cry for many different reasons. This book was so heartbreaking, and I think Jessa Hastings just endlessly writes characters that are so painfully raw and so real and really do feel like real people. This tore my heart out. Did it kind of mend it slightly? A little bit, but I still think about it every day in absolute agony and pain. So I would recommend this entire series, but this is the longest book that I read. And then flipping that on its head, the shortest book that I read was A Shining by John Foss. I do not own this. I read it at work. This I want to say is about 40 to 50 pages. It is such a short novella, and I had never read anything from John Foss before. I was always slightly intrigued too because I'm pretty sure in 2023, I want to say, he won the Nobel Prize in Literature. I had so many colleagues at work at the bookshop that absolutely adored him and endlessly recommended him to me and to so many people, and I finally caved and just read A Shining, and it was such an interesting read. It is probably one of the most stream of consciousness novels I have ever read. In it, we are essentially following a protagonist who one day just drives into a forest, and that is all you should know. Like, he drives into a forest, maybe he sees something strange in this forest, maybe he doesn't, maybe he ends up lost, maybe he doesn't. It was just so strange and so beautiful in many ways. I did like John Foss's writing in many ways, but like I said, it was the most stream of consciousness book that I've ever read in my entire life, and I personally love stream of consciousness novels. This one was so stream of consciousness to the point that it was kind of solely the narrator's perspective and not really many description. Due to that, it did make it quite repetitive because obviously the protagonist was thinking the same things over and over and over again. So for that, it was good. I would recommend it because it is so short. Don't know how I would have felt about it if it was any longer with that sort of narrative, but I did like it. I ended up rating it 3.5 stars. So if you're for a short read, I would recommend it. The next question is a fun one, and it is the highest and lowest rated book on Goodreads that I read this year. I was scrolling through my Goodreads with all of the books that I read this year, what all of the ratings were, and I'm not gonna lie guys, I do not agree with this. The highest rated book on Goodreads that I read this year is apparently The Women by Kristen Hanna. I did, again, read this quite recently. I read it in this reading vlog, so I would recommend watching that for my in-depth thoughts. But this had a 4.62 rating on Goodreads. Why? I personally do not understand it. This book was okay to me. Like, it was okay. There were many things that I liked about it. There were many things that I didn't really like about it. Again, I go really in depth into my thoughts in that video, but I just did not think this was anywhere near a 4.62 rating. Guys, I am so sorry that the camera angle has changed, the lighting has changed, my camera battery died, and it is now pitch black outside because it gets dark so early in the UK. I'm so sorry, but I obviously needed to carry on with the video. So as I was saying, if anyone has read a good Kristen Hanna book, please let me know. I feel like the #1 recommendation that everyone says is The Nightingale, and I am very, very intrigued by that. To be honest, I do feel like I would without a doubt prefer The Nightingale to The Women. I was just surprised that it was the highest rated book that I've read all year. And then the lowest rated book that I have read this year is one that I've already spoken about and was actually one of my biggest surprises of the year, and that is Philosophy of the Home by Emmanuel Coquillard. I will say I feel like I'm not surprised that this is one of the lowest, solely because I feel like not many people know about it or I've really heard about it. I mean, I literally stumbled across it at work at the bookshop. I saw it on the table and I was like, okay, you're coming home with me. So I had never heard anyone talk about it before, so I guess it is kind of underrated. So for that, I'm not surprised it is the lowest, but in terms of my ratings for the books that I've read this year, it would be nowhere near the bottom. Like, this was a 5 star. For me personally, this is miles better than The Women. I can't really compare them too much because they are so different, but I'm surprised that this is the lowest. Please read it if it sounds like something you would love. I want so many more people to experience it. Then we have my favourite quotes of the year. One thing about me as a reader, I love underlining. I love annotating. You bet I'm gonna try and find the best quote in whatever book I'm reading. So I'm not gonna lie, there's been so many. I feel like I would be here for hours if I went through every single quote that I've underlined this year. I feel like it's near impossible to kind of track that down. But I do have 2 books specifically. One is actually a short story collection that I haven't even finished yet because I've been getting through it throughout the entirety of this year. But I near enough underlined every single word from. First and foremost, This Is How You Lose a Time War by Max Gladstone and Amal El-Mota. I underlined so much in this book, but there was one page in particular that I always go back to and that I always think about, and that says, we sink and swell and bud and bloom together. We infuse garden, garden spreads through us. Words are abstraction, break off from the green. Words are patterns in the way fences and trenches are. Words hurt. I can hide in words so long as I scatter them through my body. To read your letters is to gather flowers from within myself. Pluck a blossom here, a fern there, arrange and rearrange them in ways to suit a sunny room. Is that not the most beautiful thing you've ever read in your life? And then at the bottom of the page it says, even poets poetry, which breaks language into meaning. Poetry ossifies in time the way trees do. What's supple, whipping, soft and fresh, grows hard, grows armor. If I could touch you, put my fingers to your temple and sink you into me the way garden does, perhaps then. This entire book was like that. I cannot recommend this enough if you're looking for good writing. And then obviously the short story collection I was talking about is the complete stories of Clarice Lispector, which I haven't finished yet. I have this much left. I am planning to finish it before the end of the year. I started it in January, so it feels right to have been able to read the entirety of it in 2024. I'm obsessed with this, obviously. I have adored so many stories in this, but one of my favourite short stories now from Clarice Lispector in general since reading it is Another Couple of Drunk. But specifically in that story, this entire page, like this entire thing I underlined, and is one of the most beautiful things I've ever read in my entire life. I honestly just want to sit here and read you the entire thing, but I feel like we'd be here for ages, but it's so beautiful. One of the best things I've ever read in my entire life. So I'll read you a few lines from it. The moon is way up in the sky, aren't you scared? The helplessness that comes from nature. That moonlight will be the same tranquil ghost when the last traces of your great-grandson's grandsons no longer exist. Prostrate yourself before it. You've shown up for an instant and it is forever. Don't you suffer? I myself can't stand it. It hits me right here in the centre of my heart, having to die one day and thousands of centuries later, undistinguished in humus, eyeless for all eternity. I, for all eternity, and the indifferent triumphant moon, its pale hands outstretched over new men, new things, different beings, and I dead. It's shining over the cemetery right now. The cemetery where all lie sleeping who once were and never more shall be. There, where the slightest whisper makes the living shudder in terror, and where the tranquility of the stars muffles our cries and brings terror to our eyes. There, where there are neither tears nor thoughts to express the profound misery of coming to an end. That is what I mean when I say Clarice Lispector is my favourite author. When I say that she writes like no one else I've ever read from before. That is one of my favourite short stories from her. I've read a few more than a few lines, but it's Clarice Lispector. I kind of have to. I'll always rave about her. So those are probably some of my favourite quotes of the year. Next we have the most unique concept, and without a doubt, the second that I thought about this, my brain instantly went to Monstrilio by Gerardo Simono Cordova. This was actually my first ever book club book for my Patreon in November. I uploaded an entire spoiler-filled reading vlog over there, so if you're ever interested, it's always linked down below. But this book is without a doubt one of the most unique and strange that I have ever read. We basically follow this mother who has very recently lost her son, and in her grief and her grieving her son, she decides to keep a little bit of his lung, and essentially over time, for one reason or another, that lung becomes sentient, that lung becomes a monster, and it is just such a beautiful but like achingly heartbreaking story about grief and accepting who somebody is and who you are and human nature, and it was just one of the best things I've read in a really, really long time. Equally one of the most unique concepts out of every single thing that I've read this year. This definitely takes the cake for the most unique. We only have a few questions left, and the next one is about rereads. Did I reread anything this year? Do I plan to reread anything that I did read this year? Honestly, no, I didn't reread anything this year. I've never been a huge rereader, but that is one thing, and I will say again in a second, that I really want to take into 2025. In terms of what I read in 2024 that I would be keen to reread, first and foremost, without a doubt, anything by Clarice Lispector. As I have always said, she's my #1 favourite author of all time, and despite the fact that I am planning on finishing her complete short stories in 2024, I'm going to be revisiting all of her stories and her novels for the rest of my life. Like, I am on a lifelong journey with Clarice Lispector. She's undoubtedly going to be like my #1 author, my #1 writer for the rest of my life. I will be very surprised if one day someone comes and replaces her as that and like takes the #1 spot, because for her, like for me, she's it for me. So I definitely will reread anything and everything by Clarice Lispector. Honestly, I feel like I would reread a lot. I feel like I would reread the entire Magnolia Park series, obviously any Carissa Broadbent. This Is How You Lose the Time Where I'll definitely reread. There is a lot that I feel like I will reread that I read in 2024. Leading on to that, we go on to some of my reading goals for 2025. So as I just said, one of the goals I definitely want to do is I want to reread more. I want to reread a lot of my favourite books to see if they still stand the test of time, like I Who Have Never Known Men, The Secret History, Near to the Wild Heart. That one will always stand. All of them I feel will stand the test of time, but I'm just so keen to reread them a few years after already initially reading them. So I definitely want to do more rereads. This year one of my main goals was to read longer books, to read books that have been on my TBR for a while, and again I definitely think I've accomplished that. Could I have always done better? Yeah, but I feel like that's always the case with any sort of reading goal, but I definitely want to continue that next year. I never want to be put off of reading a book solely because it's a long book or like it's 700 plus pages and I just want to read them, and I definitely have some books books on my TBR that I'm gonna prioritize with that next year. Maybe I'll do a video of just reading like super long books, but that is definitely something else I just want to carry on from here on out. I think in terms of a number goal, 2024 was the first year, I want to say in about 3-4 years, that my number goal wasn't 100, and this year instead my goal was 75. But at the time that I'm currently filming this, I've read 111, so I definitely want to set it for 100 again next year. I have that goal in mind of reading long books, not reading short books. I read a lot of short books anyway, but I never want to be in the position where I feel like I need to read short books for my reading goal, which is why I lowered it in 2024. But I feel like I've kind of proved to myself that I can still read over 100 books whilst having that goal in mind and reading longer books. So I think I'm gonna go for 100 in 2025. And I think other than that, I just have goals that I always am trying to implement, especially when it comes to reading more diversely and being more inclusive with my reading. Even in genre, I want to continue expanding, but I do feel like now I read everything anyway. Like I read from every single genre, babe, but I just want to make sure that I'm carrying on doing that next year. I don't know, I need to kind of sit down with myself and really think of goals. I definitely want to keep up with another reading journal in 2025. I did start one in the middle of 2024. It has lost me slightly towards the end of the year, but I want to make sure that I'm doing that from the beginning to the end next year. I'm just really excited for another year of reading and content and filming, and yeah, I literally cannot wait. And then the last question is, what do you want to prioritize with your reading next year? But I feel like I've kind of just answered that, so that is it for this book tag. Oh my god, I cannot believe we are at the end of the year. I have definitely had a really good year in terms of my reading, in terms of content, and I just want to thank you guys so much for being here and for supporting me always. If you've been with me since I started my channel or at the start of the year, or you've literally joined throughout Bookmas and me posting throughout December, thank you. It genuinely means the world. I am so excited to carry on with all of this forever, but also in 2025. I have so many fun video ideas and reading plans that I cannot wait to start. Of course, if you have read any of the books that I mentioned in this video, whether they were like some of my disappointments or my surprises, please let me know. Let me know what you thought about them. Equally, please feel free to let me know any of your favorites or disappointments or surprises. Any of the questions that I answered, feel free to answer them down below. Or if you also just filmed your own end of year tag, let me know. I love watching these videos so much. I feel like they're so good for recommendations. Oh, and if you did watch until the very end of the video and you want to show you stayed until the end but you don't know what to comment any stack of books emoji, of course. As always, all of my socials are linked down in the description box below. I have my Patreon, my Instagram, my TikTok, my Goodreads, and so much more. As always, thank you guys so much for being here and for spending some time with me. I really hope you enjoyed, and I will see you again very soon with another video.